Hello, welcome to another multi-part game asset tutorial. It's been a long while since my last video, and in this series we'll be creating a gold mining cart complete with tracks and gold ore for our portfolio. In this part we'll be doing the bulk of the modelling. The finished result you can see on screen now. Before we start modelling, I just want to briefly go over reference. So I use PureRef, and I gather up these images from online and organise them into different categories. So for example, here's one about the different parts of the track, the way the rails look, the way the sleepers look, how these how the rails are fitted to the sleepers with the rail pins. I also did a bit of research on the dimensions, the spacing, things like that. You can find all this information out online. Here's different types of wheels that you typically got on these carts. Next, on to the shape of the cart itself. There's different tip mechanisms, handles, levers, brake mechanisms, materials. They're all things to consider and think about how you want your design to look before you start. Then lastly, there's the gold ore itself. We'll be filling the cart with this, and the way this is sort of mined out of the rock, and you get sort of gold veins going through it. Okay, that's it for the reference for the moment, and let's begin modelling. So over in Blender now, first thing I'm going to do is add in a cube, move it up, one on the Z-axis, so it's sitting on the ground plane, and apply all the transforms to place the origin at the world center. And then just in the overlays, I'm going to turn on edge length because we are going to be doing this first part. We're going to be using some precise measurements. I've already wrote down ones of these that I found online. You can do your own research on this. There is a variety of different track sizes and lengths and sleeper sizes and dimensions. I found the range and then went with the larger ones just because it's slightly better to exaggerate the dimensions, I think, sometimes, especially when working in 3D. So this first bit that I'm doing here is I'm just starting to put together the shape of one railway sleeper. I'm just holding down shift while moving on a confined axis just to get very precise movements. Precise measurements, I should say. Also note the spacing of these, so I'm just going to shift D and type in the exact amount, and then shift R to repeat the exact same duplicate and move procedure. Put the origin in the center and then snap it to the world cursor. Next, I'm going to add in another cube, and this one is going to again be moved up one on the Z-axis with the transforms applied with Control A. And I then snap it to the height of the sleepers, and then I'm going to start scaling this in to make the first of the rails. So I'm going to start with around 5 centimeters thick, 5 centimeters wide, I should say. You're of course welcome to eyeball this, but I find it's better to work with some sort of real world dimensions in mind, because if you're going to put a character next to this or something like that, you haven't then got to adjust proportions and things like that if it doesn't look right. I'm just moving this off center now because the way the rails are actually spaced goes by the gap in between. Mirror that over, and then I just need to center the origin between the bottom faces and then snap it on the Z-axis to the top of the sleepers. Next, I'm just going to add in a plane for the ground. We'll be texturing and possibly displacing this later, but I just want something underneath the sleepers for the time being, just because it looks better. I'm just going to add some loop cuts now to refine the shape of the actual sleepers. the rail, extruding the top and bottom faces to turn it into the profile of a rail that you saw in the reference. As you're looking at it from the end on, it's kind of an eye shape, but it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top. And the top tends to be sort of rounded out, but we'll do that later on. Because we've added some size to that, we need to move it out further on the x-axis to make the sizing, the spacing in between with the other rail consistent. And that's easily done just with the mirror modifier. Okay, moving on, we're going to move on to the wheels next. I found a radius of 0.15 works, and 0.76 will give the width between the rails. Rotating that 90 degrees on the y-axis, and then I'm going to snap that to the top of the rails. Next, I'm going to extrude this face. .075, and that is the thickness of the rail. And then I'm just going to inset this slightly and delete 1/2 because we don't need that side anymore. Just going to right click and N to fill that face, and then we're going to extrude along normals for this part, just to give it that part that grips around the rails and stops it going off. These are angled in real life, and we'll be adjusting that later. The wheels taper so that when they go around the corner, it stays on the tracks. There's probably a technical term for that, but I'm not sure what it is. Just mirroring that over at the moment, and then in edit mode, I'm just going to select those, Shift D along the y-axis, and give them the spacing for the measurements that I've already established. Next, I'm going to apply all the transforms. Alt-S to recenter the pivot. That's using Interactive Tools add-on. And then move it back to center it in the world. Again, I need to snap that to the height of the tracks. Always keep my snap settings to vertex and active. I'm going to use the old Auto Smooth modifier. I have to apply it twice sometimes because the first time it will sometimes produce weird results, so I just undo and then redo it. Okay, that'll do for blocking out the wheels, and then next we're going to add in the axle. We'll be refining all these parts later, by the way. This is just to get the sort of the overall shape and that established before we start refining it. Snap that up on the Z-axis and then forward on the Y, just to center it in the middle of the wheels. I'm just going to scale it in on the X-axis as well. And again, apply the old Auto Smooth modifier. You can get this free online. And then with that axle selected, I'm just going to Shift D and duplicate it back on the Y-axis for the other wheels as well. Next, I'm going to add in another cube and start constructing the frame of the cart. It's quite hard to find good reference for the way the frames are constructed online, so I'd sort of started ad-libbing it a little bit. I don't think it matters too much, as long as you've got the basic dimensions of, say, the track and the wheels and things right. The rest of it you can sort of eyeball to make it look roughly right. You do have to have a little bit of artistic license with it. So the design I'm trying to go with here, I'm going to have basically an iron side on it here, and then I'm going to have cross beams going across to create a frame, and then the frame will be refined later to have different features. So similar to the iron used for the rails, I'm going to inset the sides. Just extrude along normal, and then I'll delete these end faces because they're overlapping. Add in some loop cuts and snap them to here and here. Then I'm going to fill this face and grid fill this face and this one. Next we can mirror that across on the x-axis. We just need to apply the transform for it to appear. And if we do it on the y as well, it will sort out the end. Okay, next I'm going to select this face, Shift D to duplicate and separate by selection by pressing P. And then I'm going to move this edge up here and this edge in slightly on the y-axis. And this is to start creating the cross beam. So I'm just going to extrude that across there. I'm not going to be refining this bit too much at this stage. Just applying the transform, and then I'm going to mirror that on the Y, so it just duplicates it to the back of the cart as well. Just going to scale those apart slightly, just to make it fit further towards the front and back of the cart respectively. And now we're going to start working on the cart itself. So I decided to go with a kind of half barrel design, but I did also want the planks at the top to extend slightly, but I didn't want them to go straight up. So I'm going to be using a certain workflow to get that to happen. So to begin with, I'm going to be constructing the metal support frame, but I'm also going to be having wooden planks within that frame. So using the knife tool with K, A for angle and C for cut through, just to cut through the middle of the thing and delete the top. Not sure. No, I don't need to fill this top face in actually. So I'm going to delete that and delete these end caps. Just going to go into front view. Let's see what I'm looking at here. So if I put on solidify, and you can see from this angle the tops of this are angled slightly, and that's good because I want it to flare out so that it could hold more ore. So when I extrude that, it's going to be an extra plank, and it's going to go slightly wider than it would if I'd just solidified this from a circle, for example. That'd be completely level and it'd go horizontal. So I'm just going to snap this face forward to the front of the cart and mirror it to the back as well on the y-axis, just so it's sitting within the support beams. Just going to delete that extra edge loop from the mirror modifier there. And before I start insetting this to make the metal frame, I just need to get the measurement of this edge here. So up in the overlays, I'm just going to turn on edge length briefly and make a note 0.0882. Turn that back off, and then that's the amount I'm going to extrude this by. And the same on the other side. So extrude along a normal, just click anywhere, and then I can type that in. And then I'm going to repeat that again because 2 of those extrusions is 1 plank. But I do need the midpoint between them because that's where the metal support is going to go to. With this loop of faces selected, I'm just going to inset that by the same amount again, just so it's a square inset on the end there. And then select these loops, and I'm going to bevel those apart again by the same amount. Next, I'm going to invert the selection and delete everything. select these loops and grid fill. And these are going to be the metal supports that hold all the planks in place. So I'm going to select all these inner faces now, Shift D, P, and separate by selection. Out of edit mode and select the new piece. And then in top view, I'm going to select all these verts at the front and snap them to the crossbeam, and then the same at the back. And you can see we can see through the side there. That's because back face culling is on, so I'm going to just disable that for the time being. And I'm just going to go through and select every other edge. You select mirror, expand on the x-axis to select both sides and delete those. And now these faces here are going to be the individual planks that are held in place by that metal frame that we've made. So I do want to have even spaces between these planks. So I'm just going to select all these edges, and I can bevel a gap between them, but the trouble with that is it will then come away from the frame, which I don't want. If I look at it from the Y end, you can see it moves away until it's no longer touching the frame, which I don't want. You can fix that by having a profile of 1 and 2 segments. So you press P, 1, and then A to adjust the angle. But because I also need to solidify this, and I'm going to do that first, I'm going to put the solidify modifier on and get roughly the thickness I want. And then I'm going to go back into edit mode and adjust the bevel while still looking at the solidify modifier, because I want the inner corners to touch ever so slightly, while the outer ones, I want them to just be apart. You can see what I'm doing there. So add in the extra segment, scrolling the mouse wheel for 2 segments, press P1 so it stays in the right place, and then I can adjust the angle by pressing A. Then I can delete those, and that gives me a nice gap, evenly spaced between all the planks. And then I can apply the solidify modifier. Next, I'm just going to add in a edge loop on the metal supports. I'm just going to basically using this for something to snap to. So if you ever want to snap to the middle of something, you can simply add an edge loop and then delete it afterwards once you've used it for its purpose. So with the knife tool, we'll just cut through all of the planks, and I'm just going to snap that edge loop forward to here. And then I'm just going to bevel that edge loop 2 centimeters. Seems to be working quite well. Delete that edge loop now because I don't need it. And then back with the plank selected, I'm going to select half of the faces on the inside, and this is going to make the end parts of the cart. So I just need to select the actual faces, not do that. So I'm just going to extrude these on the x-axis after, duplicate and separate by selection, and then I'm going to select that new part, extrude on the x-axis, scale to 0 on the x-axis, and delete the faces on the ends. And then I'm going to use a mirror modifier with bisect and flip, and that will fill in that space nicely. I can apply the mirror modifier now, and I just need to move the point at the bottom down so that it fills that little last little gap there. So just grabbing that vert, GZ, and move it down so it fills that space. Next, I'm going to mirror that to the back of the model as well, just so we've got it in both places. I can also just delete these extra edge loops. We don't need these ones. We do need the one on the bottom plank because it's holding that last point that goes towards the bottom. Okay, just having a look around the model, see how it's coming along. Next, I'm going to adjust the ends of these metal supports. So I'm going to add in a loop cut here, and then just delete the top part, and then right click and end to fill that in. Add a loop cut down the middle. And I'm just going to add in a quad sphere quickly. This is a Machine Tools add-on, the quad sphere. And you can see it does give all kinds of errors when you are trying to change the subdivision. You can just type in 1. There are also other ways of making quad spheres. So I'm just turning on Align to Target. And I'm just going to basically test something out here with placing rivets around the frame. I'm going to be doing this again in a bit, so don't copy this for the time being, unless you particularly want to. I'm just going to measure out where these are placed, because I want them to be in the middle of each plank. Because I want it to look like there's a bolt that goes through the metal frame and then through the plank, holding on the end pieces. So I'm just Shift D and holding Control to snap them to these verts, and then join them all together with Control J. And delete that edge loop because we don't need that at the moment. Apply all the transforms, and then we can mirror these over on both the X and the Y, and apply the mirror modifier. Okay, and they are sticking out quite a bit, so I'm going to definitely redo those later. Just going to apply old auto smooth to the metal supports. And I've just realised I haven't mirrored these over, so I'm just going to, before I mirror them over, I'm just going to bevel these to give it a slightly different look. Chamfer these, sorry. A bevel with no segments is a chamfer in Blender, and it just rounds out the ends of these metal parts, or they will be metal parts, which I quite like the way that looks. Okay, so I'm going to mirror that over on X and Y, and apply that. Next, the top of these, I'm just going to use GG to edge slide these down, just so it slightly sits within the side planks. So I just think it gives it a bit of a better look. I still want it to sit above where that bolt would go through from the metal frame though. I can delete the, I've got these edge loops here that go around each plank. So I'm just going to go into top view and select all those edges and just delete them because they're not doing anything. Just going to delete those bolts for now, and I will redo those properly in a later time. Just going to join the frame and the planks together, and then re-add in the old auto smooth modifier. And next we're going to work on this A-frame down the bottom. So I've selected the loop of faces around the middle, and I'm just going to inset that slightly. And we're going to turn this into an A-frame, so I'm going to extrude this this top face. We can turn off a line rotation from where we was looking at the bolts. And I want to extrude it to this vert here because this is the middle of the cylinder we used for the cart. And it's quite important to remember where that is because we're going to be pivoting from that when we make a tilt mechanism for this. And one little trick I'm just showing you here, you can go in, select all the faces of the cart, and then select the and then also select the top of the A-frame and adjust both at once. So if you need to adjust where this thing's pivoting from, say the bolts are intersecting with the frame, you can then go in and move it up relative to with the height of the A-frame coming along with it. It does obviously affect the angle of the way the A-frame is constructed, but because we've not added any other details, that's not too much of a problem at the moment. Next, I'm going to add in a big cylinder to work as it's going to be both the pivot point for the cart's twist mechanism, tilt mechanism, sorry, but it's also going to be the boolean to cut out of the A-frame. Just going to delete the back one for the time being. then I'm just going to shift. We've only got one of these sitting here at the moment, so I'm just going to Shift D and right click to leave it in place, and then I'm going to use a difference boolean to cut it away. And you can see that's cut out the exact thing there. This was snapped to the same height as the A-frame, so that would also be like the midpoint as well. Next, I'm going to select all these faces, and I'm going to inset these because we're going to extrude these inwards to give it that sort of iron effect that the rails and the sides of the frame have. So I'm just going to snap these forward so that this part's straight, and I'm also going to just merge this up here, just so we haven't got that small little extra face there. I'm going to mirror this in all directions apart from the Z. And next I want to select these inside faces, and I'm just going to extrude those inwards a little bit. And then on these end pieces we can delete these extra faces that were created. And I want to add in an edge loop there. Going to verts, select all verts and merge by distance. You can see it's removed 4. We can again mirror that in the X and Y directions and apply the mirror. We can delete that middle one, we don't need that. And then we can just fill that inner face there. And the same on the other side. Just right click and N. It's a quick way to fill a face. Okay, out of isolation mode, we can then apply the transforms and mirror that to the back. Apply the mirror and continue working on the pivot. So I'm just going to move this on the y-axis, snap it to the front plank, and move this to the A-frame. Snap that to the front of there. We will be refining the shape and design of the pivot. And I'm just going to add in the old auto smooth modifier to that as well. And you can see there it didn't work first time, as it often doesn't, so you have to undo and then redo it again. Apply the transforms and mirror that on the Y as well. Just so I've got that at the front and back. Okay, next we need to sort out some sort of way to connect the axles to the actual frame. So I'm just going to hide some of these parts just to make it easier. I just want something to loop around and just hold on to these wheel axles just so they're connected to the frame. So I'm just going to make an edge loop and then snap those over to level with this iron beam. Shift D to duplicate this ring of faces, P to separate by selection. Out of edit mode, I'm just going to select delete the edge loops we made, and then out of edit mode, select the new object we made. Select all the faces and extrude, right click to cancel, and then I'm going to scale, excluding the X axis. So scale and then Shift X. In front view, I'm going to deselect the bottom faces all the way through the model, extrude them up on the Z axis, scale them to 0 on the Z axis, and then I'm going to snap them up so that they're the same height as the bottom of the iron beam. From here you can scale these outwards in X view, and I'm trying to keep it in line with this part of the cylinder that holds the actual axle. Adding in an edge loop and then just moving that all the way out to the top and then down on the Z axis. It will create a even block for it to join onto the beam with. Then extrude along normal on these faces. And then I'm just going to chamfer these corners just to give it a little bit of a different design. When we come to do the low poly, we'll be using the bevel modifier for a lot of the shading. So I'll probably do these in a way where they sort of meld into the body of the iron beam, so they look like they're just kind of welded on. But for now, I'm just going to mirror those over so they're in the same place on all four sides. Next, I want to create a sort of tow bar thing so that you could link multiple ones of these together. So I'm just going to add in a cube and snap it to this vert at the front. And I want to know where the midpoint of this is, so I'm just going to add in a temporary edge loop. So I'm going to snap that to that vert, scale it down on the z-axis, and I'm going to make this cube the size of the whole thing, but I'm then going to cut the cube in half and have the top half at the front and the bottom half at the back of the cart, so that if you link them together they'd overlap and you could put a pin in there and chain a whole bunch of carts together. Adding in an extra edge loop just for the time being, and delete the bottom half and refill that with right click and N. Now I'm going to bevel these, clamp overlap, press C, and then I'm going to increase the number of segments all the way up to 8. When we do that, merge all the verts, because there'll be some that are connected at the same point in the middle. And I'm just going to add an edge loop across here, just so I've got the it makes it easier for the boolean that we're going to do through this in a moment. So I'm just going to join that one up all the way through there. Next, I'm going to add in a cylinder. And because I used 8 segments when I was beveling the corners of the tow, I'm going to call this the tow bar. When I was beveling the corners of the tow bar, I used 8 segments, so obviously that's 32 verts. So that's how many I used for the cylinder. So I'm just going to snap that into place and then use a difference boolean to merge everything together. And we can use, I think it's F2 tools, and I've got that set to Shift F2. Control Shift F I've got that set to add a face from an edge. So I'm just going to Shift G, coplanar, and then duplicate this face down to the bottom as well, and it will be flipped. So I'm just going to press Alt N and then flip, and then remerge by verts. Merge verts by distance, I should say. Sorry. Add in the old auto smooth modifier. And I'm just going to scale that boolean in, the whole in slightly, excluding the z-axis with Shift Z, just to make it thicker around the edge. I'm just going to bring this forward slightly and delete these faces. And then I'm going to snap that back to the body. Next, I've just changed the pivot point to the vert at the bottom. Then I'll Shift D to duplicate, and then rotate 180 degrees on the y-axis so that it's placed perfectly underneath. I also want to rotate it 180 on the z-axis, because this one will be going to the back of the model. I can then snap that to this part here. I can delete that temporary edge we made on the A-frame. Again, that's just for the purposes of marking out the midpoint. Next, I'm going to select the edge around here, and I'm just going to move it back slightly on the y-axis so that it intersects with the body of the A-frame. If you did delete the faces on the inside part of that earlier, you might need to re-add them before doing the boolean. I'm not sure if it might delete the whole thing if you do it otherwise. I'm just going to boolean that to the A-frame. So these are now one object. Merge the verts because of the ones in the middle. And then I'm just going to connect these up to the geometry around it. So just corner to corner. So that's okay for the front, and then I'm going to do the same on the back. And just checking that the thing is boolean together properly. One thing to note here as well is there'll be a bit coming up later where we have to mirror the front and back A-frames. But obviously where we've now added something that's asymmetrical, we can't do that, so there's a different method that I'll show you. So you can see that's now connected to fully to the body. Just going to save that quickly. Next, this pivot could do with some refining. So I'm going to add in an edge loop here and snap it to the front of the A-frame. Then add in 3 on this part and delete the middle one. This is a little technique I use a lot for spacing things out a certain way. So if I want something to be 1/3 of the body or 2/3 or whatever it is, just add in the right amount of edge loops. To scale this in, and then the inside edges, I'm just going to bevel those and merge them at the center, just to create this sort of curved effect. Next, I'm going to add in some bolts. So I'm going to change this to 6 verts, so it looks like a hex bolt. Just make it small, and then I'm just going to snap that to the pivot point, to the pivot of the cart that we've got. Rotate it 90 degrees on the X and snap it forward, just so you can see where it is in relation to it. Scale it down, just so it's that size. Just going to move it up slightly and back. So I want this to be the bolt that kind of goes through and connects this pivot to the actual cart. That's still quite big, so I'm just going to scale that down again. And I want a certain amount of it sticking out, so I don't want it too close to the center, because where it curves around, it's going to be hard to see otherwise. Next, I'm going to add in an empty. Snap that to the pivot, the cart pivot that is, and then I'm going to mirror. I'm going to apply these all the transforms on this hex bolt, and then I'm going to add a mirror modifier and use the empty as the target object. I'm going to rotate the empty 45 degrees, and add in the X and Z on the mirror modifier. Can then delete the empty, and we've got the bolts there. Just move those back slightly. And the middle ones of those are going to going through where there's a gap in the planks, so I will be rotating these in a moment, but I'm just going to extrude these back through the body. And I want to add in a sort of metal plate on the inside of the cart for these bolts to come through. So the plate would be holding the planks, and then the bolts are holding into the plate. So I'm just going to snap that there. It's just a plain object, scaled into place and rotated. And then just extrude it slightly to give it some thickness. These bolts I can move back slightly. And then I'm just going to quick origin to the selection, and then rotate them 45 degrees. And you see that's much better placement around that. Again, Quick Origin is part of the Interactive Tools add-on, which is free. You can get that online. I do have a video of all the add-ons I use somewhere on my channel. It's in one of my playlists. So if you have a look for that, if you're struggling to follow this tutorial, I do recommend using all of them. They do make all of Blender a lot easier to work with. Next, I'm going to refine the A-frame. So I've just inset this and changed the depth on it slightly. And I want to make a groove for the cart pivot to sit in. So I'm going to now do the same thing for this. I'm going to add in an edge loop here, another one here, snap it to there. And then I'm just going to inset this and then use the depth to push this out. I do want a bit of a visual gap there just so it catches some shadows, but I also want it to, the shading to sort of snap into place with the angle on the auto smooth modifier. I'm going to inset this, inset it again, and then I'm going to extrude the middle part. Sorry, I accidentally hit the wrong key there. And then extrude that in. And you see this pivot is already looking a lot better than the big lump it was before. It was just a solid cylinder. Now it looks like it's actually got some design to it. Just going to apply everything to that and then mirror that over on the y-axis. So we've got it on both sides. And then re-add in the auto smooth modifier. And we need to copy what the changes we made to the A-frame to the back as well. And this is the bit I was talking about earlier. So I just selected the ring of faces around the middle and grew the selection once and then deleted it. And then did the same on the front, duplicated it and then snapped it back into place. And then we can just merge by distance. Whereas if we'd mirrored that, the tow bar wouldn't be in the right place. Next, I'm going to make some handles for the back. So I'm just duplicating these two faces off these planks, separate by selection, and then I'm just going to scale them on the X. Just going to straighten up these verts. And then scale this in narrow, move it over to the side. And I'm going to use this to make a plate for some handles to help tilt the thing. And I want it to be perfectly in the middle, so I'm just using this as a guide. Mirror this on the Z-axis, so it's the same distance. And then we can delete that middle edge, we don't need that anymore. Just going to extrude that slightly. And so we're just going to have a sort of a bar handle just on this part that sort of just sits in the middle. Might have it angled slightly as well. Just adding in edge loops to space out where I want this to be. And my preferred way for making handles that have a curve in them is to actually bevel some normal geometry. So I'm just going to duplicate these faces and extrude it, and then I'm going to use bevel on these edges. Not sure if clamp overlap, put that on, and then maybe 4 segments just to get that curve. Maybe 6. I'm not going all the way to the clamp on this one. Selecting that one edge for some reason. Never mind. So I'll select these and deselect these. Shift D to duplicate this. Right click, P to separate by selection, and then delete that geometry. And then this edge that we've made, we're going to convert that to a curve, and we can then adjust the thickness of the cylinder. I just find this a better way to get that inside curve. If you drop the resolution down to 1, it becomes a 4-sided cylinder, and every additional resolution you add to it adds 2. So you always see me drop it down to 2 and drop it down to the lowest and then add them on. I normally like it to be 8 or 16. So you can see that's 4-sided. 6, 8. And I'm just checking what the shading looks like. 10, 12, 14, 16. Yeah, I think we're going to need 16 just to keep the shading nice. And you can see that these aren't pinching or overlapping on the inside of these curves. Convert that back to a mesh. And then I want to join that to the rest of this plate. So I'm just going to delete these faces at the top and bottom. Join the objects together with Ctrl J. And select the top two edges and bridge them together. So bridge edge loops. Then do the same on the side. Same again at the bottom. And same on the other side. Next, with the other area, I'm just going to extrude these edges and then change it to vert selection and merge at last. And just do that for the remaining gaps. Just going to select all of the faces we just made, deselect and reselect that bottom vert, and then we can Shift D and snap that down to here, and then merge everything by a distance. And see that removed 24 verts, and then we can re-add the auto smooth modifier. I can adjust. I want this thing to be slightly bigger, and I want it to be evenly spaced around it. So I'm just going to scale this up after extruding it. Sorry. Press S to add in offset even, and then I want to basically remove the unnecessary geometry on the inner side of this. So we don't need that edge loop there. Just going to bring it forward slightly. And I think that's quite a good size for the handle. Next, I'm going to select these extra edges and remove them. And I'm going to merge these verts to the corners as well. You can see that does leave behind one edge that goes around the back, so we can just delete that. We don't need that anymore. Mirror that on the Z-axis. And apply the mirror. And then we've got extra geometry in the middle now, so we don't need some of this. Again, we can delete that one in the middle of the handle from the mirror modifier. And we can collapse that edge in the middle. We don't need that. And I might just leave the one. Yeah, I'm going to leave the one going across the middle. Going to just apply the transform and then mirror that across on the X-axis. I don't want it on the Y. I just want the handles at the back of the cart. Okay, then in edit mode, I'm going to select the whole handle and I'm just going to rotate it on the Y-axis. And I just want to give it a bit of a tilt. I saw some of the cart designs had these handles, and I quite liked the way they looked like sad eyes, and I quite liked that. I thought it gave it a bit of character. I do like to add a bit of character to some of my models. There was a transport a teleportation box I did a while ago, and I put these sort of like googly eyes on the front of it, and I thought it looked quite good. I'm trying to keep this sort of vaguely accurate as well to something that would look like a real world mining cart. So yeah, just going to space those out like that. That looks pretty good. Oh, and while I was rotating those, I was doing it to 5-degree increments as well, just because it's always handy to do it to a set amount, just so that if you have to undo it for any reason, it's quite easy to snap it back. And they're just sitting nicely within the frame, so they're not going to catch on any part of the A frame or anything like that as well. Selecting these loops facing out, I'm just going to duplicate these and bring these inside the cart. And I'm going to basically use these to make bolts for the other side of these. I'm not going to add a plate for these on the inside. And I'm just going to check or deselect the ring of edges around each of these and delete. Then I'm just going to cap these off for now. Right click and N, just so we've got some basic bolts sitting on the inside. Just going to deselect and then reselect that face so I can use that to snap back against the planks of the cart. Okay, next I'm going to be adding a lever to the front of the cart. To do that, I'm just going to add in a cylinder, change it to 16 verts for now, make it small on these, and then I'm just going to get it snapped into position. So I'm just going to bring that up on the Z-axis and bring it forward in front of the cart. And at this stage, it's just a case of getting the proportions right. So I want this to look a good size for relative to the pivot. So scaling that on not the Z-axis, just going to exclude the Z-axis from that. Snap this down here, snap this in front of you. I'm going to snap this to the top of the bottom of the pivot, and the same with this piece. I'm going to snap this to the top of the pivot. This is all my OCD at play. This is just me having to have things measured out precisely. Just extruding the top of the handle up. We'll work on that afterwards. Next, I'm going to add in another loop here and another loop here. And these loops or faces here are going to be, I'm going to inset them and then use them to attach it to the pivot, similar to how we attached the wheel axles to the frame of the car. So selecting this ring and this ring. And I want it so it sits within that loop of faces that's on the end of the pivot. So I'm just insetting that about there. Shift D to duplicate, P to separate by selection, out of edit mode, and then reselect the new object. And extrude along normals. Actually, I'm going to use scaling to do this. So right click and then scale, Shift Z to exclude the Z axis and just extrude them out slightly. Then in top view, I'm going to deselect the ones at the front. And again, same as with the wheel axles, just going to extrude that on the Y and then scale to 0 on the Y. Then snap that back against the body of the front of the pivot. Again, I'm going to scale these on the X-axis so that the angle matches up with the curve of the part that goes around the handle. Add in a loop cut here and here, and scale it to 0. Actually, no, I don't want to scale that to 0. So Control Z to undo that. I'm going to select both and use edge slide to slide them up to the body of the pivot, and then just bring them back slightly on the Y. That will change the angle as it connects to the part that curves around the handle though. So I'm then just going to select both these rings of faces, and in top view just scale them out slightly again on the x-axis, very slightly, it doesn't need to be much. Now where we've extruded everything, these are no longer sitting particularly straight within the ring of faces on the pivot, so I'm just going to scale them in slightly on the z-axis. Just to give it a bit more of an even look. And then I just want to fix up the topology and refine this handle a bit. So we've got a lot of edge loops here that we don't need. They were just for spacing out the parts that hold it. So I'm just going to select those and delete. Next, I want these. I want the same size either side of the part that holds it. So I'm just going to snap this ring of faces down against there. I do want it to have a very slight gap, so I'm just going to move this whole bit up very slightly on the z-axis. And same with this, just down very slightly on the z-axis. Next, what I want to do is I'm just going to extrude and then scale on the excluding the z-axis again, just to get this sort of lip around here. And then I'm going to select this edge and scale those out as well, just so that they sort of flare out and make it look like there's a part fitted to the handle that's there to stop it sliding out. Again, the way some of these objects are separated will be, I'll be going over that again later when I come to do the high and low poly baking of this, because we'll be using the bevel shader. So with that, you need certain parts to be joined and other parts to be separated. And I find it much easier to work on that after I've established what I want the thing to actually look like. Just refining the end of the handle into something that you could grip. And I do want it to look quite sturdy, because obviously you'd be tipping over a large, heavy cart full of heavy ore. Again, later on, when I do sort of get towards the final stages, I might pose the handle off at an angle like this, just because I think it looks slightly better if it's slightly off like that. But I'll worry about that later. I'll leave it vertical for now. Okay, next I want to refine the A-frame slightly. So I'm just going to select these faces, Shift D to duplicate, separate by selection after bringing them forwards. Just going to clear the sharp off of that. And using the knife tool, I'm just going to cut across here, literally anywhere, and just delete this top part. And then I'm going to bring this, just delete that center line, we don't need that. I'm just going to scale this in slightly. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to make a cutter to cut a hole out of the middle of the A-frame. So using edge slide, if you hold Alt, it will let you extend it beyond just moving it inwards. Extrude this forwards. So we've got a block. Check the face orientation. I've got that set to Shift 9, so you'll see me quickly toggling it on and off. Apply all the transforms and recenter the origin. And then I'm going to use a brush boolean, a difference brush boolean, just so I can still edit this while I'm placing it. So I'm just moving that within the A-frame, and you see it cuts the hole out. Now if I scale this, you'll see that the sides change the angle that they are, and I want them to stay the same. So if you want to do this, you have to select one side and move it over, on the x-axis, and that keeps the same thickness on the side part. And then what you can do, you can still use modifiers on these booleans while they're active, or the brush ones anyway. So I can mirror that over, and you see it does it on the same on the other side. It does create this edge loop down the middle. And I want to move this down, so I'm just edge sliding this down just to give it a similar sort of thickness at the top as it's got at the sides. And then I just want to select the corners, and I'm just going to bevel these and increase the segments. Doesn't have to be a large amount, 4 should do. And then when we're happy with how that looks, we can apply that. Oh, before doing that, actually, the pivot of this is still in the center of this object, so apply all, and then we can mirror it on the y-axis, and it will cut the hole out of the back as well. And then you can apply the mirror and apply the boolean. And then delete the cutter. And I like having that there because you can see more of the planks that are overshooting the cart in the middle. Next, I want to work on the rail pins because we've not done anything with those yet. So I'm just adding in a cube and adding in edge loops on the sleepers because I want to space these a certain way, precisely in the middle. Snap in the origin point to the bottom of the cube there, snap it to the surface of here, and then I'm just going to move it in on the x-axis to here, and then we're just going to do a little bit of modelling, just so we can hang it over the bottom part of the rail so that it looks like it's a pin that's actually holding it in place. Just going to move it close. Maybe move this up slightly on the z-axis. Add in a loop cut. And then I just want to extrude this face inwards. Deselect that and then move this up on the z-axis. This is roughly the shape of these pins. Obviously, the majority of it's sunk into the sleeper. Okay, that's not too bad. Scale it in slightly, maybe. And from the end, I just want to move this over, just so it covers more of that. And then these edges here, I'm just going to move these up, just so it's not intersecting with the rail. Next, I'm just going to bevel this, 4 segments, and merge by distance. And we can fix up the topology, just adding in an extra loop, extra edge there. J, add in the smooth modifier. Okay, I'm just going to add in an edge loop down the middle of this rail. And snap an empty to it. Next, I'm going to mirror the railway pin using the empty as an object, just so it's on both sides of that rail. Apply the mirror, delete the empty, and remove that extra edge. Make sure you are in edge mode or it deletes all the faces as well. Okay, so now we've got that. And this is the reason we added in the extra edge on the second sleeper. So we can Shift D this on the y-axis, snap it to there, and then just use Shift R to repeat that another 3 times. On the sleepers, we can then delete those edge loops. We can apply all the transforms on that and then mirror that over for the second rail. And although it's such a minor detail, it's that extra detail that really makes it pop, because it goes from looking quite basic and just sort of boxy stacked on top of each other to a bit more refined. Next, we need to refine the rails. So these edge loops, sorry, these edges down the lengths of the rails tend to be beveled or chamfered. They're not completely flat. So 4 edge loops there, and then just merge all the verts. And then put the shading on. I'm not going to bevel all of the edges on the rails. We're going to let the bevel shader do some of that as well. Next, we need to taper the wheels. And just so we're only working on the one wheel, I'm just going to delete the other 3 for the time being. Select this face, and I'm just going to scale this in slightly. And as I said I think I said at the start, the reason they taper these wheels is so that they stay on the tracks when it's going around a bend. It helps keep the cart level. Just adjusting the shape. And there's a lot of different designs of the wheels, as we saw from the reference at the start. So you'll feel free to make your own type. I'm going to go with quite a basic type. Just going to bring this out slightly. Selecting the axles, I'm just going to scale those on the X to put that inside. Then mirror these all over. Next, I'm going to bevel these. Just to round them out. 4 segments should do. And just bring them out slightly. I like this style because it just looks like it's covering the wheel axle. Next, I'm going to add in a bevel modifier to the railway sleepers. Just want a 2-segment bevel and shade smooth on that. And just apply the modifier. I just wanted a nice, the same bevel on all for now. Next, with the wheel axles, we need something to stop it sort of sliding back and forth, and for the wheels colliding with the cart, because otherwise it would grind away at the wood or grind away at the metal. You'd have sparks flying everywhere probably. So I'm just going to insert this and insert it again. Grow the selection and then delete the selected middle faces. And then extrude long normals. Just going to grow those slightly, just so the wheel axle doesn't rattle in and out. Again, it's a very small detail, but it just adds something. Next, I want to add some bolts for the frame. I'm just adding in edge loops on the A frame and on the rails and on the frame here. Again, I'm just going to use a 6-sided hex bolt type design. Make it very small, and then I can just use those edge loops to easily snap it into place where I want it. So I'm just going to snap it there, and snap it to this one. Rotate it 90 degrees on the Y, and then it's just a case of resizing it so that it looks right. That looks way too big, so I'm just going to scale that down. And then the same, I'm just going to, you see here I used 3 edge loops just to space them evenly. With both selected, you can change it to individual origins at the top, and then you can scale them both at the same time. And I'm just going to bring the back face flush with the surface. These are all things that I will I will move these and bake these separately when I come to do the baking. One thing I also want to do is rotate these by a random amount. Again, it's a very small detail, but it's just one of those things. Things tend to not be constructed with like perfectly evenly screwed in bolt nuts and bolts. And then just mirror that all around the model. And those bolts are what holds the outer part of the frame to the A-frame. Next, I want to do the bolts for the cart, so I'm adding in that edge loop on the metalwork. And I'm going to use Machine Tools quad sphere. I'll show you afterwards there is another way of getting a quad sphere that doesn't involve an add-on. Pretty sure it's part of the default Blender ones. And I'm just moving the geometry down slightly on the Z-axis compared to its origin point. And the reason for that is we're going to align this to target, and then when we snap this object to here, and I'm just going to scale it down, and you'll see that the center edge loop is now sunk slightly beneath the surface of the metalwork. I'm going to duplicate and snap these to all of these verts, and then this being the last one. Then we can join all those together. Control J, apply the transforms, and then just mirror them over on the X and on the Y. Apply the mirror. Next, we can delete that edge loop that we added here. With these selected, I just want to see how they look with the smoothing. They don't look bad as they are now, but I'm just going to add in 2 levels of subdivision just to smooth them out. Those are just going to be baked into the normal of the metalwork, so it's not too important at the moment. Another way of adding the quad sphere is if you go up to add-ons and add in mesh extra objects. In your mesh objects menu, you'll have a round cube. You can add in a round cube and then change the preset to quad sphere, and it does it. And it's basically the same thing. If you change arc down to 2, you get the quad sphere that we got from the Machine Tools add-on. Just a little aside there. Next, I just want to add in a pin for the wheel hubs. So just a 16-side cylinder. And I'm just going to snap this to here. And then I just want to scale it down, move it down on the Z-axis. And this is just for one of those types of wheels. Just looked like it had like a pin that went through this hubcap that secured the wheel axle to the wheel. Scaling this in place now, Shift Z. Use the old auto smooth modifier. And then similar to the hex bolts for the frame, I do want to rotate these to different angles. But first I'm just going to mirror them around the model on the X and the Y. Just need to apply the transforms. Apply the mirror modifier. And then individually I'm going to just rotate these. Just so they all look like it's stopped at a different rotation. That's it for the modelling. In the next part we'll be looking at different techniques to do the OR for inside the car. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.